The Mist of Gateway Grove, a Norcom Union story by Nicholas K. Rojune's tribe warned him since he was little to stay away from the mist at night. The mist, they said, takes people. They called it the dread for the feeling it gave you after it took notice of you and came near. The mist takes people. He had always been warned about the dangers lurking above the surface, about the unending winds, the radiation storms, the sandstorms so terrible they can wear the skin from your meat in minutes, about the Norcom Union and its soldiers. He had seen it himself more times than he cared to think about in that moment. People pulled in after storms let up, their screams endless and throat-rending until they eventually died of infection, still rang in his ears when the winds picked up. Sometimes they would come back with gunshot wounds. He thought of his father's stomach and the cluster of scars just below his ribs. Every night, like clockwork, the mist would rise up from the basements and tunnels beneath the Gateway Grove residential compound near his tribe's settlement. But Rojune wasn't scared of it. Since before he was born, it had always just been part of daily life. It had been since before his father was born, for that matter. But his grandfather used to say he remembered before the mist started to appear. He even remembered back before the fall happened. But aside from the oldest survivors, it had always just been there, emerging from beneath the moldering bones of the old republic, filling Gateway Grove with strange, shifting lights like distant stars floating quietly in a gray void. The ruins of the old republic stretched as far as the eye could see, a dystopian wasteland of crumbling buildings, twisted metal, and barely human Union soldiers penetrating deeper and deeper into the wasteland, claiming it and its people for the grandfather. Each day, Rojune and the other scavengers from his tribe ventured out into the wasteland in search of resources the settlement needed: fuel, food, and new sources of drinkable water. Today was Rojune's first solo trip. The wake-up call sounded through the away barracks they used when they had to stay in the field overnight. The dead gray sky roiled and lightened somewhat. The morning had come. His father took him to a burned-out subway station. The entire scavenging party shouted and cheered with elation when he came out with a satchel full of mixed sizes of lithium batteries from a storeroom that had escaped the fire and an armful of dead rats. They'd have meat tonight, first meat in days. Satisfied, they gave him a bicycle with saddlebags and sent him on his way. An initiation ritual for any 14-year-old in his tribe. If he did well, they might invite him to join one of the motorized raiding parties. Those guys were heroes in the eyes of his people. He pictured himself seated in the gunner's turret atop a repurposed truck guarding slaves from settlement raids and women for the Destiny Outbound Center's gene stock program, machines, tools, and whatever. Or they'd give him a motorcycle and he would scout ahead of the main party during their next raid. Maybe he'd even come back with the location of a fat settlement ready for harvesting. He would prove he deserved it. He had gotten turned around while looking for a path through a ruined neighborhood when the clouds darkened. The wind began to whip around him and he knew a radiation storm was coming. He rode hard back the way he came, trying to get back to the barracks before the storm began. When the clouds began to take on a blue glow, he dove from his bike and bolted for the first building with intact walls and no windows he saw. Rojune scrambled up over a wrought iron fence and across a lawn of dead grass, and came to a stop in front of a steel-paneled door at the top of a small stoop going into what seemed to be a maintenance garage for a residential compound not unlike the one his tribe settled in. He pulled open the door and plunged into the pitch dark within. The tension turned his blood as thick as honey and stole the air straight out of his lungs. With the signal blocked by the storm and the building and trapped until the storm passed, he waited, and then he fell asleep. He awoke after a restless, dream-filled sleep and the storm still sizzled outside. He was starting to grow restless when sounds began to echo up from somewhere further inside the building. Taps and ticks at first, like the sound of tiny clawed feet skittering across bare concrete. Rats. His heart stopped and his insides turned icy. He looked at his phone. 9:15. That's when his heart sank completely. He began to pace, to wonder what he would do. Even if the storm ended, night was here, and the rot dogs would be out hunting. He noticed then that the air seemed thicker than it had been when he first came in. It seemed wetter, colder than before he fell asleep. He took out a small flashlight from his carry kit and tried to light up the room. The beam slammed straight into a wall of mist, like being in one of the steam showers back home. He froze. A mix of terror and curiosity surged through him. He recalled a trick his father taught him for getting through dust storms at night. He dropped the flashlight as close to his feet as he could and angled the beam so it fell across the floor like the fog lights on the UTVs. The floor came into view and a measure of calm returned to him. He walked for a while, following the corridor to see where it led. He knew from going on scavenging trips with the others that many of these buildings had access points to the infrastructure tunnels under the city. He focused until he could recall a memory of thick steel doors with large wheels as handles, and steel lock bars thicker than his wrist. The blast doors. He was never allowed to go past the blast doors, though. They said that those doors were like a border into a place called the Crypt, and they said things were down there that he couldn't understand. He always pictured coffins and caskets and skeletons when he was little, but after his older brother had come out after his first excursion into the Crypt, his face was different. His eyes seemed like there was nothing inside them. He said that it was nothing like they had imagined. It was far worse, but he could never remember what exactly it was that made it so bad. An echo reverberated up to him from somewhere further inside, derailing his train of thought and pulling him back to the present. The sound was indistinct, but he could swear it was a voice. Maybe some of the others were caught in the storm and found themselves here too, he thought to himself. They were all in the same area when the storm came. No one knows how to predict a radiation storm. They could be here as well, he wished aloud, and immediately regretted doing so as the air instantly turned colder, and he suddenly felt like he was being watched. He wished more than anything that he had one of those weird helmets with the tubes on the front that lets you see in the dark. He saw a group of militia wearing them and heard one call them nods and another call them noodles for some reason. Didn't make sense to Rojun, but he just knew they let you see in the dark. He started to wonder, so took out his phone and turned the camera on to IR mode. A little bubble of light appeared on the small screen that extended a few meters in front of him. He could make out the walls, fallen tiles, and exposed pipes. Rojun tried the flashlight again, and the fog was thicker than before. He didn't think it was possible, but there it was. He shivered, and his mind was flooded with tales of the dread stealing the warmth from people caught in the wrong parts of the wasteland at night. Rojun froze. He had never been anywhere near the dread before. Everyone in his clan talked about it whenever someone turned up missing. His parents warned him to stay away from it, but now that he was in it, curiosity gnawed at him. Filled with a mix of fear and determination, he decided to find out where those sounds had come from. If nothing else, maybe he could find a way out. Rojun crept from room to room and ventured deeper into the sub-basements. This place was oddly not empty. Most of these places have been picked clean for years. His mind reeled at what he had found here. The clans have been going deeper and deeper into the wastes in recent years to find good salvage. How could this just be sitting here like this? As he went from room to room, he took pictures of intact electronics, canned food, all kinds of fabrics, and even some hand tools. These were slowly replaced by dust. Remnants of a bygone era surrounded him. Abandoned utility corridors, manhole covers leading to places even deeper than he was now, and forgotten chambers with dust-laden tables, chairs, whiteboards, and cabinets standing silently forever where they were abandoned. The air grew colder, and gradually he became aware of dim lights sporadically flickering in the mist. They twinkled just around distant corners, always just out of sight. The Wastelander, his grandfather's superstitions bleeding into his mind, held his breath, unease starting to replace curiosity. In the echoing darkness of the tunnels, Jun began to hear the mysterious voices again. Faint whispers echoed through the corridors, calling his name and luring him deeper into Gateway Grove's underworks. The dread seemed to coil around him, whispering formless words that didn't echo in the corridor like his own breathing and footsteps did. Fingers brushed against him, seeming to search furtively for something. The sensation got more and more intense until he felt as if he was being pushed by rough hands further down the hallway. The feeling intensified the deeper he ventured. As he pressed on, the feeling became more pronounced, like numerous tiny little fingers searching for ways to infiltrate his body, to drink his vitality. The mist seemed to condense around him, and the lights grew dim, as if from kilometers away. The underground world became a dance of shadows and whispers, the air thick with a presence he couldn't explain. Nothing he could see or even really hear, but just feel and react to. The Wastelander pressed on, compelled by the voice's growing insistence. As Jun ventured deeper, the world outside grew distant, and the underground tunnels became a formless cavern of shadows, the whispers rising to become dull, distant echoes like shouts of crying. The feeling of being watched intensified, and his wonder shifted to a growing unease. Yet drawn by the insistence of the voices, he followed the ghostly whispers until he reached a forgotten chamber, a place he only noticed after stumbling over a partially collapsed brick wall. Ancient machines stood like silent sepulchral sentinels, their functions lost to time. The shadows behind one such machine seemed to take on the shape of a face watching him in his camera screen. His heart jumped, but fear sprang up in him, but it seemed distant, almost belonging to someone else. More faces coalesced in the mist every time he turned around. A feeling like fingers caressing him urged him along, but every time he turned around, nothing was there but a wall of black just outside his tiny bubble of infrared light. All eyes were fixed on the center of the chamber, where a strange luminescence glowed quietly behind a blast door, similar to the one he had been warned away from before. The faces were familiar, people he might have encountered in the ruins, members of other clans, trading caravanners, even some faces he knew from his own clan, but he couldn't put a name to them. Some moved restlessly in the shadows, others approached the light, and some stood as still as the forgotten machines, unblinking, unmoving. Jun felt the chill in the air deepen, the voices in his mind urging him to continue. He knew distantly that he should be afraid, he should be overcome with terror, but he wasn't. He felt a sort of calm as he moved past the spectral onlookers. He reached the blast door and turned the wheel. The door swung open in complete silence. Mist and lights swirled around the room, now green, now blue, now purple. The faces smiled, relief and gladness washing away the stony emptiness that had adorned every face just a moment before. Many of the faces turned and smiled at him approvingly. Voices inside the doorway called out, praising him for his bravery, and the air turned cold enough that his skin hurt. That was all such a faraway concern, though. The lights were the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He didn't know such beauty could exist in the world. It rent his mind with gentle, massaging fingers. The voices congratulating him gradually coalesced into a single, pulsating sound. A rhythmic chanting that, although formless at first, came into focus somewhere in the center of his mind. He couldn't make it out, but the shape of words emerged from the cacophony. His feet moved as if on rails, taking him closer and closer to the gate and the mysterious, swirling light. A discordant, rumbling click began to reverberate in the floor. Jun felt it in the soles of his feet, even through the layers of leather and recycled tire rubber. The note resonating from the ground harmonized with the voice to form an undulating, drawn-out invocation. a soft, droning melody. It sang praises of his journey, of the path he had opened himself up to, and the wonders awaiting him just beyond the gate. A distant memory surfaced, a relic of some other life, of an abandoned bike outside a wrought iron fence, of dreams of a motorcycle and a title. He wondered if anyone would notice he was gone, if anyone would worry, but the thought faded as the enchanting glow enveloped him. The fingers of the dread massaged his dissolving mind. Slowly, slowly, he allowed himself to be pulled closer to the door. The air grew so cold it started to burn his exposed skin. Pain radiated out from the inside of his bones, and he shivered uncontrollably. That pain belonged to another person in another life, though. The voices pierced deeper into his mind, growing clearer, more insistent. Thousands upon thousands of voices, all speaking now in unison. They whispered long, breathy whispers. He could now make out the words they had been calling since they appeared. Worship me. Worship me. Voices echoed down from somewhere far away, real voices really echoing through the world he was occupying, had occupied. He wasn't sure which was true anymore. The voices called his name. They were filled with urgency, with fear, but that seemed so inconsequential to Rojun. They would just have to wait. The gateway was open, and the light beckoned. Rojun inhaled deeply, then slowly let out a breath as the voices throbbing inside his head repeated their pulsating, undulating command. Worship me. Worship me.
Ministry of Public Security, Division of Human Resources, Public Service Announcement. Citizen attention is required. Commissar Chen reminds you, subscribing and liking will be rewarded with increased rations. Commenting and sharing will be rewarded with a social credit boost. But failure to comply